Good morning. Thank you for tuning in to Hobby Hi-Fi. I'm using my Samsung S9 to record this video, and I have set the rear video resolution at 1280 by 1020 or 1280 by 980 or whatever it is. Standard high definition to hopefully shrink down the size of the videos just a little bit. I don't think that a whole lot of high resolution is going to be necessary here, so we're going to try it out and see if we actually save some bandwidth. A couple of strange things happened today, first of which, most recently, I was just stared down by a bumblebee. So I go out on the deck and, you're standing around and you turn around and all of a sudden the bumblebee flies up real quick and stops a foot from your face and just stares at you. And of course, your reaction, my reaction anyway, is to sort of jerk back like, what the heck is this? And that scared him off, and so he buzzed off. But what was he trying to say? Curious things happen certain days, and today there was two. The other thing that happened that was quite strange, this morning I got up and turned on my non-functioning Adcom GCD-700, and it was now functioning. Hard to explain when things like this happen. If you take the cover off this particular model, this is a changer, and let's see if I can just sort of pull this off with one hand. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. All right, but as you notice on this front right hand corner, there's a copper strap here that I'm assuming has something to do with its grounding properties. And so originally, when I started having some wonkiness with this thing, I decided that, I questioned how important the grounding is to the proper operation of the unit. So I had some strange things happening, like down here, there's a set of buttons that denotes each tray. And as I put a couple of discs in, it would recognize one, it wouldn't recognize the other, so the light wouldn't light. If it recognizes a disc in that tray, there's a little LED light that will light in each one of these buttons. So strange little things like that seem to be acting funny. The other thing, the next time I put a disc in, they all lit up except for the one that was being used. So kind of backwards, and it makes you think that there's something electrically going on here. So originally what had happened, I had some of these abnormalities going on aside from the blinking display, and I think at a certain angle, it's tough when you're recording this because the frequency sometimes doesn't let you show. It's kind of like trying to record a computer monitor, but there is definitely a blinking going on there on the display. So that was another red flag that said there's possibly something going on with this. But at some point, and this is a changer, like I said, and so with the single players that I have reviewed earlier, much easier to get at. The drive assembly is in its own little box here on the left, and easily gotten to. Because of the carousel design of this that they need to put on top, it sort of hides all of the goodies underneath the tray. So what you first need to do is open the tray up. And once you open the tray up, this one is nice that it'll allow you to shut it off while it's still open, and it won't automatically close. So after I had done some tinkering, the first thing that you look at with a lot of CD players is go right to your mechanism here, your drive assembly, and check out what's going on. There are some gears here, as you see, and this is one of the belts. The other belt is tucked up underneath this over here, as you see. This one looks a little bit slack. I believe this is the one that runs the tray. And then this one here is probably what runs the spindle and the guts, so to speak, of the drive. So anyway, not exactly sure what my first goal was, but I wanted to check the operation of the drive, and so check the belt. That seemed okay. Both of these will come off quite easily. This just lifts up, and this, with each one of these screws, this cog gear here will come off also. The belt will come off, and then you can more easily get to, I say more easily because it's still not easy, but then you can actually get at the rear, I guess sled is what some people call these, the inner mechanism of the drive assembly, where the laser is housed, and also the drive spindle, which the CD rides on. You'll see there in the far back. So once you get those gears out, it's easier to get at that. Unfortunately, what that does is it sits way back against this firewall, I like to call it. And on this side, that sled, plastic sled that we see here, is only held by a plastic slot. And on this side is the only screw right in here down. The problem is this is the only screw that holds that assembly in. So you have to get that screw out. It doesn't really need to come all the way out as soon as you get it. It's quite a long screw, about an inch long. You get it out 3/4 of the way, and you can slide that mechanism out. But unfortunately, what you've got to do to get at the screw back here is to sort of pry this to get to, because it's right down in the crack between these two. You can't even fit a screwdriver in there, and this screw is down about 4 inches down on the board. And so really interesting how difficult they've made this, but at some point you need to sort of, you might even be better off getting gloves on, because some of these corners can be sharp. This one's not too bad, but you're going to need to pry this back. And I'm entertained loosening some of the screws on the back panel to see if that would loosen up, but it really didn't. So I'm like, geez. So anyway, they've made it pretty difficult, but if you get a narrow screwdriver, a Phillips, a long one, in the right spot, and you get the right pry, it's possible. You have to be careful, though, because there's a board of sorts here. So you don't want to be too rough with that area. But man, I'll tell you, these are not easy to work on compared to a single player, I will tell you that. And so anyway, I was able to get that assembly out of there at some point when it stopped working altogether, and I had thought that possibly I had fried the laser. I had cleaned the laser with alcohol and Q-tips, which is my standard procedure, and which has been discussed in several different forums regarding, whether or not you actually want to use isopropyl alcohol or not, because it can be a bit rough on plastics. But I do anyway, and I think I've had pretty good results. With a cotton swab, in this case, the laser is tucked up under here so tight that unless you take the mechanism out, which I eventually ended up doing, but I wanted to clean that, be able to clean that lens off without actually being able to, having to remove the sled out here. So that was tricky because it's in there, behind the spindle there, and you've got to get a Q-tip bent at a sharp 90-degree angle to be able to access that laser and still not be very rough with it. So it's sort of a tough situation even to clean the lens in this. So for these players, I might actually recommend the disc cleaners. Some of them are not well reviewed, not well liked by the pros, but some I find actually work. Products by like Alsop or Allsop is a good one, and they have multiple brushes that will go in and sort of wipe away that lens a little bit. I don't think it cleans as thoroughly as isopropyl and a Q-tip, but I think it may be the better option in this case. So anyway, I was able to get that drive out, and long story short, I had thought I had blown the laser because everything had sort of stopped. I couldn't get it to really do much. So anyway, I put it back together. It wasn't working when I put it back together, and this morning when I hit the power button, it worked fine. Who knows? But I'm going to call that mystery number 2 for the day. Something that's strange, about this player. It's a good player, but when you open the drawer, I'm looking at disc 2 and 3. Now, it doesn't seem. I was trying to, at some point, sort of move this tray back to see if it was out of position. But every time it did, it seemed to want to reset itself, make some clanking noises, and sort of readjust itself. So it always came back to this position, which is by default playing number 5 first, because as you can see, the number 5, when that slides straight back, that's going to be the one that it wants to grab for some reason. So another anomaly, I guess. But anyway, I was very confused when I hit the power button today. Let's see, we'll just hit play. Oh, turn it on first, right? Let's do that. Let's turn it on. It'll close on its own. Makes a little bit of a rattling noise. The gears, I'm not quite sure if they need a little bit more lubrication. Now, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because now we're not actually seeing any of the discs. So disc skip no longer works, and so this is the kind of thing that was happening, sort of erratic behavior, hard to explain, things like that. And again, once this started happening, I started wondering whether or not this ground here on the right actually had anything to do with that. So anyway, you can choose a particular disk. This one happens to be in disk drive 3, but that doesn't seem to do it. Let's see, disk skip does not work at this point. So now I have to assume that maybe that ground cover does actually have something to do with it, this grounding scheme, because this type of behavior sort of confuses me. So what I'm going to try to do is just check that out quickly. Excuse the camera angle. I really should have a better way of doing that, because I have to use both hands sometimes, but it's also hard to get a movable target camera on these things without maybe a GoPro or something. So anyway, some people will tell you that you can try to reset a particular electronic device by plugging it in or unplugging it and letting it sit for half an hour. I've seen that given as a reset or a final option or something from people like Fixia, which is an online electronics repair site where you'll have somebody come on and chat with you and charge you some money after if things work out well for you and whatnot. More of a consultant site, but I'm sure there's some qualified people there. But honestly, I'm not sure if I've ever had a CD player come around by unplugging it and plugging it back in after a certain period of time. But anyway, we're willing to try all manner of things here, and so the disk is in drive 3, and as you can see, after putting the cover on, turning it off and back on again, and putting the cover on, it's now recognizing disk 3. So I have some reason to believe that grounding scheme, and granted I haven't screwed that cover on yet, but I think that your ground may be having some impact on the electronics here. So anyway, it's showing disk 3 is available now. It's showing my table of contents. Let's see if I can get my fat hands out of here. And if I come down here and click the play button, it will actually play. So I'm astounded by this. Anyway, Adcom GCD-700, well-made player. Rumor on the street is this is actually a Denon player that was sort of rebadged. I can verify the fact that there is a Denon chip inside, and from what somebody has said when they have compared them side by side, I think I had seen a photo somewhere that they were darn near identical as far as the layout goes. The question then becomes whether Adcom has changed or added anything to the circuitry. This particular CD player I thought always sounded very good, and I sort of attributed that to possibly this all Class A analog circuitry. And so, what does that mean? Well, Class A is something that Yamaha used to do. A lot of companies got into that quite early when they realized that there was a particular bias or a voltage scheme that was a little bit higher juice, I believe, is how I would describe it in layman's terms. And I'm by no means a circuitry specialist or expert, but Class A to me always seemed to run a little hotter in things. So Class A amps always seem to put out a little bit more heat. But as a result, I think they had a little bit more dynamics and a little bit more oomph, if you will, on transients and things like that, possibly a little more headroom. But how that relates to a CD player, I'm not sure, but I can say that this one always sounded very good. When it started acting wonky, as I said, I had taken the cover off. I'm just going to do this one more time, see if I can do this real quick and show you some other things that you may encounter with this particular player and possibly other ones. I'm knocking things over here. I'm very unprofessional this morning. I'm going to need to open this up. I forgot. Okay, so the player is working when everything is lined up, when the stars line up. But one thing I did notice when I was checking out this board, and something that I had read on one of the forums, that some of these caps have a tendency to go bad. And so when I first opened the cover, I looked down on this largest capacitor, which is a 3300 microfarad capacitor. And right around the joints, it's hard because I don't have very good light. But down at the bottom of this capacitor, I noticed some brown goo. And when you see things like that, you have to sort of, I think you might be able to see it a little bit. No, not too much. And possibly right at the joints where that capacitor's leads hit the board there, you can sort of see some black flaky things. Well, I had gotten at that. It was quite a bit worse than this. And I had gotten at that with a small tool and had tried to remove some of that goo, which sometimes is actually glue that the manufacturer has put in to keep the capacitor from wiggling around too much, especially some of your larger capacitors. They have a tendency to glue those things to the board. However, this particular capacitor is not contacting the board. If you were to look underneath this, there would be almost 1/4 of an inch between that capacitor and the board. So the chance that they tried to glue that to that board and take up 1/4 of an inch with glue is not very good. My conclusion, and something that somebody else had said, was that the capacitor had actually expired. And so what happens a lot of times is when a capacitor goes bad, it will leak out its electrolytic fluid and will then no longer become in spec. Whether it'll actually still work or not is a good question, enough to get the circuit to pass signal, but there may be some compromises there, and that may be something that might be really best tested with some lab equipment like an oscilloscope, and be able to get a reading on your computer or your screen as to some distortion or something. A capacitor tester is always a good thing to have, which is a tool that I do not have. But I think what I'm going to do, since this is really the only capacitor that I see, I think there was maybe one other one that looked like it might have an issue. But I think what I'm going to do is just simply snip off these leads, since the connection is not too bad, and possibly try to clean those up a little bit better. But if I do it well enough, if I just snip those leads to that cap off, I may be able to solder a new capacitor on without actually having to remove the board. And that's a sort of maybe a bad way to go about things, and probably not recommended. But in this case, to be able to get this board out of here would probably be an act of God, is my assumption, since this chassis is sort of made almost like after the fact. None of this stuff is removable, so I'm not sure, you know, whether the bottom panel would come off or not. That's possible. Definitely an idea that, you know, you might be able to remove that board from the bottom, but either way around it, there's quite a bit going on there, and I think that that time for me, it would take a day or so at least, I'm guessing, to be able to remove this board and solder a new capacitor the way it really should be done, right through from the backside. But so anyway, I may be trying that with a replacement capacitor and see if that might heal any of these strange abnormalities that are going on with this particular player. But in the meantime, it appears that my laser is not fried, even though I had thought that at some point. And here we are at 21 minutes. So I have been able to shave 10 minutes off the previous video, and sometimes I have a tendency to just run on at the mouth. But I guess there isn't a whole lot else to say about this. You know, it probably should be blown out at this point with you know, some air, or vacuumed or whatnot, you know, cleaned up a little bit with some of that flaky possible electrolytic fluid on the board there. But other than that, it still runs pretty smoothly, and you'll see the Denon chip there that I was talking about earlier. So this definitely has some Denon lineage, which is quite odd. But companies will often just rebrand an item and possibly make a few changes and call it theirs. Let's see, was there one other thing? Oh yes, this tray, when this tray moves, let's see, just wanted to show you that this cord can be a bit, it's held in place here by this clip, but at some point it seemed like this was catching a bit, and I'm not sure why. But make sure the routing of your cables is okay when that tray closes. I think it was this corner was catching on these cables, so at some point you may need to move those a bit, or just sort of realign those so you're comfortable with the fact that that it's not going to catch on anything, because at one point I think that this tray had a rough time closing, and I'm quite sure it was because it caught on those cables. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. I guess the last thing I would want to say is, if you do need to get at this front belt that is on this on this front corner, which I believe drives your tray, I think what you're going to need to do, you can almost get at that belt and you can see it there, but in case you can't, I believe that these, where are they? What am I looking at? Oh, they're underneath here. Well, I guess we'll skip that. So anyway, Adcom GCD-700. Nice player, sounds good, tough to work on. Good luck. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.